Alrighty, hello climbers, and welcome back to another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC Season 5. We are very thrilled today to be talking about Rev 3, NIST 800-171 Rev 3. For those of you guys who are not aware, we are going to be starting we're calling it a spelunking series, which I think is pretty fun. We're stopping our climb of just other CMMC topics to get down to the nitty-gritty of certain things. And so we're gonna dive through the Rev 3 cave today.
A little bit. Yeah, we're gonna stay at the control level to some extent,
Yes.
not down to the objective level.
Yes, we don't have 4 hours for you today, okay?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
give us a little bit of grace about this, but yes, for those of you guys who are not aware of how NIST publications work, there's an A version, which has assessment objectives, and then there's a non-A version, so NIST 800-171 Rev 3, if you look at that, it doesn't have the assessment objectives broken down in detail with that document. We are gonna look at that one today. But there's also NIST 800-171A Rev 3, which has the assessment objectives broken
Right.
down. Okay, so we are going to link both of those in the description below. Please know that if you're looking at them, there is a difference, and that is the difference. The assessment objectives are broken down.
And you're assessed at the assessment objective level, so
Yes,
that's what matters.
yes, very important when you're prepping to prep at the
But I think I
assessment
love this
level.
you guys came up with this. I love the fact that we're gonna do it first at more of a high level at the control, because there's some things that are happening that I think you would wanna know that at the
Yes,
control level.
yeah.
And we'll obviously talk about some of the objective level items, organizational defined parameters they have in there, but we're not gonna go through all of them, because there's, 510 assessment objectives now,
Yes, there is,
versus
510.
320.
Yeah.
So, quite a larger impact. It would take us weeks to go through all of them, and we're just not gonna do that.
Yeah, yeah. So to start with kind of explaining if you're also new to understanding like why would I need Rev 3? I've only been hearing about Rev 2, right? Why would you even be talking about this? Is this even necessary? Yes, it is. Because we know although 32 CFR, which is a CMMC requirements, is based upon Rev 2 of NIST 800-171. We know that Rev 3 is what it is going to be based upon, and they will move that over to the new version and the revision 3 of NIST 800-171 controls and assessment objectives. So, no, you're not going to be looked at with Rev 3 in an assessment if you take your assessment now by a C3PAO, but that will be coming down the line. So if you are an MSP, if you are an implementer, and you're prepping companies for this, you're prepping your clients for this, and you just made a beautiful system security plan with all of the controls and all of the assessment objectives broken out. Great job. Now it's time to make a new one.
Right. Right.
So, what we want to do is we want to try to give you guys some tools to help you when you're understanding here's what I have now and this is what I have to go to. And maybe you should start prepping that as soon as you can on the back end so that you're not fumbling when you're getting to the end zone. Is that right? Getting to the
Yeah.
end zone? Did that sound
And
like I knew
that
what
that
sports
sounds
was?
that sounds
Okay.
good.
Okay.
I would also like to add in just some personal shading here. We've
Mhm.
tried to come at this from different perspectives. We've tried to look at it. I've talked with other organizations that have had templates already established that were around Rev 2, and they started looking at, is there a conversion methodology that we could use that would be, pretty painless to take us from Rev 2 to Rev 3?
Yeah.
We have
Could
not found that.
Could
Um,
ChatGPT just like
it could,
you type it
sure.
in, you say, "Make this Rev 3 version?"
Right. The reality that we sort of have seen is I guess it just depends on how you wrote your SSP. But from the SSPs that we've seen and we've looked at, like it's sort of hard to just inject 3 into 2, because there's so many like deltas, which doing it at the higher level will help, I think, start to reveal how some of this stuff is going to start moving around. And when you start looking at how it's happening all over the place, it it sort of almost just starts to scream after you look at it for a period of time. You're just gonna have to write a new SSP.
I know. I
Um,
think by the time you start trying to, like, use what you have and switching things around, you're gonna wanna punch yourself in the face, and then you're like,
yeah, you're
"Maybe I
just
wish I
like,
just started it over."
yeah, and so at that point, you obviously can take what you have and
Yes,
inject it into what you're doing,
right.
but it's almost like you have to just go ahead and write a new SSP with all the new assessment objectives, all of it broken out. You can take it and import
Plug
it
and
in,
play.
but
Yeah.
there's gonna be gaps and sections that are gonna be missing even when you do that, that you'll have
Mhm.
to start to slide in to some extent and write some additional statements. And I think that would be the safer play from what I have seen. Apparently, the DoD or DOW is supposed to be coming out with some type of matrix to help with Rev 2 to Rev 3 assessments, and the assessment guides are going to be coming out at some point. When
Mhm.
those start to happen, that might help add a little more clarity about how you could do that, especially if they start trying to attack that from a conversion assessment
Right.
method of how you might do it. So that might provide some possible insights. But right now, we don't have any of that.
Mhm.
And so it's everybody forging their own paths. And so far, for what I've seen, the best way to do it at this point has been just page one rewrite over
Mhm.
and just inject your stuff in and then fill in the gaps. Like your header and the preamble stuff that you have for your SSP, those can just all come over, right? Those are
Yeah.
those are fine unless you refer to specific controls in some of those that you did, which you might have to tweak some. But
Yeah.
when you're dealing with the actual assessment objectives, where you're supposed to talk to them in your system security plan, you'll probably need to look at that, right?
Yep.
Because there's 97 controls, right? 97 controls
And you're
versus
like,
110,
yeah, you might think, "Well, that's less, so that's good." But then,
but
like what you said, you talk about the assessment objectives.
right,
Huge difference there.
and then they add additional families, right? So whole other sections at the
3.
bottom,
Mhm.
right, that don't exist,
Mhm.
but you still have 97, so and we'll cover that, so.
Mhm. Yeah, so let's talk about let's do that overview really quick before we zero in on some things that we wanna talk about today. So, the first thing that you talked about is, in NIST 800-171 Rev 2, there are controls, right? These are the main points that they hit on, the main security points that they hit on, and there are 110 of those in Rev 2 that we are used to. In Rev 3, there are 97. Okay, so there are less of those. But the assessment objectives that are listed and nested under each of those controls, there are normally in Rev 2, 320. In Rev 3, there's 510 details. The devil's in the details, shall I say.
Yeah.
And so then the other part that you said is these controls are broken into domains, or families, and there's 3 extras. So they broke out some things into new families that are also bringing up some from different perspectives that you might want to take your SSP as well, and we'll dive into those. We're going to again kind of focus on awareness and training domain today just to show you some differences there and start breaking down the differences between Rev 2 and Rev 3 so you can start to see that. But this is, again, a series of spelunking. So we are going to go down multiple different domains and multiple different categories so that you can start to see this broken out even more. So,
Well, and I think your choice of picking AT, Kaylee, was perfect because it's a small
yeah.
domain family, but you can see very clearly in that what's happening because it's a really good microcosm of the delta that you're going to see from Rev 2 to Rev 3,
Yes.
and it's not such a massive family that you're going to be like totally lost just by the fact that it's such a large family.
Yeah, well, I mean, and let's talk about this. Everybody knows what the words awareness and what the words training means. Like you guys know that like this is focusing on training your staff. Like
Right.
training your team to know things about security. And so like this is very comprehensive. We're not going to talk about crazy tools that you might need as a MSP. We're not going to go into that. We're going to start with this. I think this helped me when getting into it as well. And so I hope that by the time we're done with this episode that you guys are like, "Okay, I see why it's important to start this now, but I feel like I can, start to get through that."
And I would say that they stepped their game up in AT. I mean, awareness training in general was a little more, I think, I wouldn't say a gimme, but it was one that sometimes companies will fail because they weren't, as prepared because they phoned it in. I've
Mhm,
seen people
mhm.
really stumble in the AT because they weren't taking it serious enough, but they really brought the heat in defining more of what they're expecting in the AT,
Right.
so it's gonna be much harder to phone it in the AT to get away with the new Rev, 3 the way they wrote it.
Yes, and so we looked at this, we kind of plugged it in jokingly to, like, ChatGPT, like, AI of, like, "Hey, what's the percentage?" Like, if you could go based upon a percentage with the assessment objectives kinda thing, well, what's the percentage that has the most different? Actually, this was one of the top percentages that
Yeah,
was different when it
yeah.
comes to the assessment objective level. So, although this one is a lot more simple to comprehend in my opinion and grasp, as, like, a company, it did change technically the one of the most changes from Rev 2 to Rev 3. So, before I share, the perspective that we're diving into, we need to understand withdrawals. So, in Rev 3, when you're looking at the new document, you're going to see withdrawn statements, and we're gonna have pictures. If you are watching this on YouTube, you will have pictures.
Or
If
Spotify that has the video
or
attached to it.
Spotify that has a video. But if you are on Apple Podcasts or something like that, you're not gonna have the video. So I'm gonna describe what I mean. There's withdraw statements that kind of say, "Hey, this control was withdrawn in Rev 3 and is no longer there." But underneath, it does normally have a statement that this control was incorporated into this new control, okay, or this control. And so, an example of that in awareness and training, if you actually go to 3.2.3, it lists provide security awareness training on recognizing and reporting potential indicators of insider threats. That is coming from Rev 2. That's what 3.2.3 is stating in the awareness and training domain. Okay. Now, if you go to Rev 3, it has withdrawn 3.2.3. So, the insider threats training has been withdrawn. Do we not care about that anymore? No, we do care about that. That is why underneath the withdrawn statement, it states it's incorporated in a 3.2.1. So it's no longer broken out into its own control. It has actually become part of 3.2.1. So if you have the nice, beautiful visual that will be on the screen, you can see this for yourselves. But if you're looking at 3.2.1 in Rev 3, you can see it nested under providing security literacy training to system users. Underneath at number 3, it says, on recognizing and reporting indicators of insider threats, social engineering, and social mining. So, there, right there, is the insider threats part that we were talking about in 3.2.3. So, this is where this is a small piece of an example of where this movement is happening when you're
Mhm.
switching from the structure of Rev 2 into the structure of Rev 3, right?
And as an assessor, what I like it when the controls are more broken out just
Yes.
because it's a little easier for you to not get when you start having those deeper controls with tons of assessment objectives, you have to pay real close attention to track each one as you're assessing them to make sure that you're hitting all of those controls. And so I think Rev 3 is going to be a little bit tougher on assessors because they're going to have so many more of these controls are going to get very big.
Yes.
They just they've taken them and they've compressed them into consolidated them. That's the reason why they went from 110 to 97 is they're taking them and cramming them into more controls. So a lot of these controls have gotten just voluminously larger. And so it's going to just be a little bit tougher for you to go through
Mhm.
and account for all of those assessment objectives in just one that you might have been used to just being able to kind of fly through each of those controls. You're gonna have to speak a lot more about those individual assessment objectives. And so that's just know that it's gonna be a little meatier on some of these.
Yeah, and another thing that I think is important to note is when I was talking about how number 3 talk talks about the social engineering, insider threat training, and recognizing those, you can also see it talks about social mining. If I search social mining inside of Rev 2, I didn't find anything on social mining. I did find something on mining, but that's a different type of mining they're talking about. So, they also did add a few more details at the end of that. It talks about data mining when you're looking at 3.3.6 about audit records, but it doesn't talk about social mining. And so they did add a few more details even to that. So not
Mhm.
only did they nest insider threats underneath 3.2.1, they also added a few caveats to that too. And again, please don't freak out when I show this A version, okay, that adds the assessment objectives onto the screen, but visually, if you're looking with me, I'll add here. Let's go to the assessment objective level just for a second.
Right.
So you can experience the difference between what I was showing you in Rev 3 with just the regular Rev 3 version versus the NIST 800 171A Rev 3 version. You can see there is a ton of things written underneath this. So to break this down into detail, Bobby, first, do you want to explain the top section, which is talking about ODPs? So at the top area where it says determine if, it starts with ODPs in Rev 3 in the assessment objective broken down version. What for those people that are not aware, ODPs I didn't see that listed before, they may be saying. Can you explain what they are listed up here for, and the purpose of them?
Yeah, they existed originally in Rev 2, but they were just allowed to be defined by the organization how they wanted. So in Rev 2, they would use phrasing like identify or define. They would use these types of phrases in the 171 Rev 2 version.
Mhm.
And then what would happen is the organization, as they would write their policies, would then define it in the policies, and they would do it this way. And people sort of lost their mind because they were like, "Well, how do you define this? How do you define that?" So what Dr. Ross did is he created basically a variable. They're called organizational defined parameters. These variables then are allowed to be defined. So now it's like calling out these things
These
that have
specific
to be
parameters.
defined now.
Mhm, mhm.
And an example of like the first one is the frequency at which to provide security literacy training to the system's users after initial training is defined. So that's an interval. That's a time frame now that is specifically called out, and you don't get to define that anymore like you did in Rev 2. When Rev 3 came out, everybody saw that you had the ODPs that were more specifically called out, and everybody's like, "Oh, that's cool." So they just kind of called them out, and we can still define them. It's like, nope, the Department of War is going to define those, and you have to do now what they define it as. And so now there is the Department of War came out with an answer sheet. So you can take these ODPs and see what you're supposed to inject in the time. So you don't get to pick the time frame now. They do. Now they some of those ODPs do give you some variants that you can sort of pick, but they'll have a suggestion. Some of them don't give you suggestions like this is how it's going to be. So you've got to go through and look at those. So now what you have to do is you've got to take the DOWs and inject their stuff to fill in. You don't get to pick that; they do. So that makes it that much more interesting and sometimes more complicated. And then you get to
Exactly.
inject that in
Mhm.
there. So now what you have to do then is you have to go out to the website, grab it, inject the time frames, and now those are the ones that you have to now make sure your policy aligns with.
Right.
And then you can start looking at the assessment objectives. All right. So that gets real interesting.
Yeah, that you like to say it a lot. You sometimes people ask too many questions about, well, what do they mean by this? And then you wish that you didn't ask them what they mean by this, because then they start to define them in detail for you, and now you can't make a choice for certain things. So,
Right.
yeah. So what you need to do is see what those ODPs are, because before you get into trying to define this for your organization, you might want to see what Department of War has already defined for you.
Mhm.
Right?
Yep.
So make sure to check those out. So now that we've talked about some of those basic examples at a control level only, I do want to show the assessment objectives broken out in Rev 3. Now, please don't freak out when I share this on the screen for the people that are looking, but it is going to seem like a lot at first. But let's give an example of how when you break it down, it really isn't a lot. They just added more details. So if you're looking at the screen, I have to the left an example of what we were looking at before inside of 3.2.1. Number 3, it says on recognizing and reporting indicators of insider threats, social engineering, and social mining. Okay. We're going to now break that down. There
Because
are
you're doing 3.2.0.1, and it has, like, the alpha, and then they have
alpha
3 items underneath, so we're just gonna focus on that 3rd
3.
one,
Yep. So it's
um
A3.
right, which has, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6
6.
assessment objectives
Correct.
that it wants to address underneath number 3.
Just 3.
So we're breaking that down. Got it.
Yes. So 3.2.1 A3 has 6 assessment objectives underneath it. Now, you might go, holy crap, how could they talk about 6 things underneath just this one part? Well,
It's a
really,
gift of Dr. Ross's.
really, truly, it's more simple than you think. It's the 2 words recognizing and reporting. So inside of 3.2.1 A3, it talks about insider threats, social engineering, and social mining. They want you to recognize each one of those and report each one of those. And so you're going to see 1 and 2 of the assessment objectives are recognizing and reporting insider threats. 3 and 4 of the assessment objectives are recognizing and reporting social engineering. 5 and 6 is recognizing and reporting social mining. Okay. And so, as you can see, it's basically like just taking this into very detailed portions of the sentence that you see in the left side of the screen. So,
And that's where we kinda go into why it's like they're not really phoning it in as much with awareness training. They're really getting more into the weeds
yeah.
of trying to make sure that assessors have better opportunity to determine that they're doing the proper training.
Mhm, mhm. Yep, and so all of these are training of these specific things, and so just like what Bobby said, it felt like previously that there was gonna be this one-hour training that was just phoned in to say, "Yes, I did the training for the year, and here's this." But now what does that look like when an assessor is reviewing what you did? Are each one of these items identified in the training in such a way? So, like, how can you prove to the assessor, that you are truly training your users on how to do each one of these individual things, right?
I mean, I think the free DoD training for the cyber skills would still probably cover this at the minimum bar.
Yeah.
So I think you'd still be okay there,
Yep.
in how it's broken out. But they do come at you much deeper, and so I would expect organizations are probably gonna wanna add on some additional training to try to
Mhm.
help make sure they cover things.
Right. Right. Yeah, and that's a great point. The DoD training, it does cover these things, and so as long as you can prove that as well, that's a great resource for you. And this is again just a small piece of that example of the difference between Rev 2 to Rev 3. This is just talking about awareness training, and we're really only focusing on
Right.
3.2.1, which is literacy training and awareness. And so you start to already see where this spelunking series is coming from, of talking about the breakdown, where it comes in, how you should prepare. We're not saying that you need to have your whole SSP written tomorrow, you know what I mean, for this, but this is where it's really good to start thinking internally as a company of how you're going to map this out, what it's going to look like. The
Right.
MSPs that are listening to this podcast, we haven't gotten into the details. We'll talk about this in another episode, but how it might affect some of the things that you do specifically for a client. And maybe even we haven't talked about this, but your customer responsibility matrix and how you might need to revisit that as well. So you're not off the boat So, that's just another thing to think about if you are an MSP that's listening to this and you're like, oh, well, I don't necessarily have to have a whole SSP. That's another conversation, but that's my client. I have to have the customer responsibility matrix. Well, you should be breaking this out in the same way. As when you're transitioning from Rev 2 to Rev 3, you should be breaking this down to the assessment objective level for your customer responsibility matrix as well. So
Yep.
this changes how that looks. So you have to be thinking about these things, and it might not be happening to you right now, but just be prepared.
But just know that it's gonna be a significant change,
Yeah.
so you need to start now,
Yeah.
is I think the thing to start thinking about. So the first thing I would recommend you do, go ahead, create a new SSP with move over your headers and footers and the things that you've done, and go ahead and break out all the assessment objectives and they're specific, and then try to move over what you've got and fill in the
Mm.
slots, and then you'll see the gaps, right, that you have, and then you can start thinking about, okay, now you might already be doing some of this just
Yeah.
because of you guys are more thorough, so all
Yeah.
you have to do is just speak more clearly about the policies you already have, about how you're doing it, and then you might find, okay, there's some other gaps, we'll have to add in some stuff. That's the way I would probably do it, in my personal opinion, but mileage varies.
Yeah. Yeah. So we hope that this is just a good, foundational discussion about the difference between Rev 2 and Rev 3 just to start us off. And we're going to again get into more detailed discussions on some of these domains and some of these also specific controls and assessment objectives. Again, like how I said before and how Bobby said before, although it might seem like because there are less controls, right? Than Rev 2, it might not be as much. There's 510 assessment objectives, so I think, us breaking that down and showing the examples of what they've added as well is gonna be very important for you guys when transitioning your SSPs from the Rev 2 perspective to a Rev 3. If you're listening to this and you want to talk about a specific control, or maybe you have a question about a specific assessment objective, please make sure to comment that below or send a message to us so that we know, because we're going to be making these videos. So it would be great to hear those things from you guys as we're making them, and we can even address them on here, which would
Yeah.
be super cool. So make sure to do that. And then also, make sure to check out our events page. And if you're going to any of the events that we're going to be coming to, please ping us on that too. We want to see you guys. We want to talk to you. We have a super cool shirt that's coming up. I think, well, by the time this is released, actually, some of you might already have this shirt because we're going to be giving it out to some people at CS5 West. So this will be happening right after that. So I hope you enjoy your new shirts if you got
Because
them for us.
we'll have some of the old ones
We'll have
too,
some of the
so
old
here's
ones.
our
Yeah. Actually,
yeah,
you're
like,
both
show
back.
your back yeah, the
Yeah.
Back to the Future one, that's are cool.
Yeah, this one's
Yeah.
pretty cool too.
This baby hits
So
88 SPRS.
yeah, so make sure to find us at some of the upcoming events as well. We'll have CMMC Midwest that we'll be at as well coming up. A few different ones. Pax8 Beyond will also be
Mhm.
at coming up. So check us out at that, and make sure to follow us so you can be updated anytime we post new videos, as well as any webinars that we might have coming up, which we will have a few of those as well. So we hope you guys enjoyed today's episode, our Spelunking series. Next week, we'll have another episode for season 5, so tune in. But until then, guys, as always, keep on climbing. See ya.